Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video I am going to finally film my labour and delivery story for how my baby boy Wilf came into the world. Don't even really know where to start with this video, to be honest. I had initially planned to film and vlog the whole labour experience, but in my head I'd always be being induced. I either thought I would be induced for reduced movements because I'd been in and out with that for so long, or I kind of got it in my head I'd just go overdue and be induced because I was overdue, because that's quite common when you're having your first baby. So I'd never really got it into my head, the idea that I could spontaneously go into labour, so I was very unprepared for that, and therefore the vlogging didn't go to plan. I did get some footage along the way, so I'm going to insert clips as we go along that hopefully make some kind of sense to this story. But yeah, it didn't go how I expected it to go. I was very unprepared. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of ramble at what happened and hope I can edit into something that makes some sort of sense. I'm going to try and not get emotional. I seem to be flitting at the moment between extremely emotional and then emotionally shut off completely, and at the moment I feel quite emotionally shut off, so I'm hoping it can stay that way and I don't weep on camera, because that would be awkward. But yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. What happens, happens. We will see. So for those of you who have watched my previous video where I introduced baby Wilf, I had Wilf on the 27th of September and my due date wasn't until the 20th of October, so I am currently still nowhere near my due date. I would have had at least 2 weeks left, and then plus whatever I potentially could have gone overdue, but I had him at 36 weeks 5 days. So to start the story off, I should begin by saying from about 35 and a half weeks, 36 weeks, I did start to notice some things that now I know were indications of labour. At the time they were things I just put down to, oh, it could be, or it could just be that it's the first time I'm having a baby and you hear people mention these things loads of times. For example, I had quite a lot of cramping, but as we know, I've had cramping since day one of pregnancy. Since before I even knew I was pregnant, I was getting cramps. So that is not unusual in any way for me. So that didn't really mean much. I also started from about 36 weeks to lose, and I should say this video is going to be really TMI. I assume you expect it with a labour and delivery story. You expect bodily functions and all kinds of gross things like that. If you're not ready for that, I would probably X out now. This video might not be for you. But I did start to lose from about 36 weeks bit of my mucus plug. I didn't lose, this is so gross, I didn't lose you know, you hear people talk about a big chunk of mucus plug. It wasn't like that. I was losing bits every day of my mucus plug, and in my experience speaking to other people who've had babies, you can lose your mucus plug loads of times and it can renew and regenerate and you can lose it again. I remember Lauren said, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, when she had Teddy, she lost her mucus plug 4 times before she had him, and it didn't really mean anything for her. It wasn't really a sign. So I just thought it would be the same for me. It was just one of them things and it would be regenerating, but obviously now I know I was going to go into labour. Also, quite a few weird things happened in the days running up to my waters breaking. Me and Andrew just had this sudden, we're having a baby really soon. If you watched my last weekend vlog, that was 2 days before my waters broke, and we all of a sudden were like, we need to build the snus pod, we need to get the car seat in the car and check we know how to do it. I don't know what came over us, but we were just all of a sudden had this realisation of, oh, we're having a baby soon. Little did we know quite how soon, but something just came over us and told us we really need to get stuff sorted. The night, so Monday the 25th of September, I went to bed and I could not sleep. I didn't feel in particular any pain. I had a few cramps, but nothing abnormal for me. But I just could not sleep. I was wide awake. I was the word I'd describe how I felt was wired. I felt I just could not switch off. There was nothing in particular, I just couldn't switch off. My mum was exactly the same. She couldn't sleep. She didn't know why she couldn't sleep. She just could not sleep. So on 3:30 AM on Tuesday the 26th of September, I woke up thinking I was weeing myself. And I was like, oh, this is embarrassing. So I like shuffled out of bed, shuffled through to the toilet, and I was like, oh, this is really embarrassing. I'm weeing myself. But it just kept on coming, and it didn't feel like wee. I didn't have that like wee feeling. I was also really quite crampy at this point. I'd woken up with quite intense cramps, more so than I'd had previously. And I was sat in the toilet and I just thought, I feel like my waters might be breaking. So I like shouted through to Andrew, who's in the bedroom. I was like, Andrew! And then he said he didn't know what it was, but he knew at that point what it was going to be, and he sat bolt upright in bed. Normally he's really hard to wake, but he sat bolt upright in bed and he just knew. So he came like rushing through to the bathroom, and I was like, I might be wrong, but I think my waters might have broken. And I was like, I could just be weeing myself, I don't know, but I think my waters have broken. So he was like, oh, right, okay, well, what do we do? So shuffled back through to the bedroom, at which point more waters dripping on the floor, all very glamorous. And we got my maternity folder, and I rang maternity assessment, and I said, I'm 36 weeks, 4 days pregnant, and I think my waters might have broken. And they said, okay, well, you're a little bit early, so definitely come in, we definitely need to check you out. And I said, what do I do? Do I bring my hospital bags? And she was like, it probably isn't, to be honest. It's probably not that. So, I mean, bring them, just leave them in the car. But I'm sure it's fine. We'll probably be able to send you right back home. By this point, I was thinking, no, my waters have definitely broken. I'm sure you will not be sending me straight back home. But anyway, we got into hospital at about 4:20. Went straight up, and let me refer to my notes here because Andrew made notes throughout the day. And at 5 o'clock, they did an internal examination with a speculum and confirmed, yes, my waters had most definitely broken. So it was weird because I wasn't so early that anyone was worried for baby. I was classed as preterm, he wouldn't be classed as premature. Like, I was 3 days before I was due to be full term, so I was preterm. He wasn't premature, so no one was really concerned for whether the baby would be okay. But at the same time, if you're preterm, they can't send you home. They have to kind of continually monitor you, and yeah, they can't send you home, which I, for one, was really grateful for. As we all know, I'm an extremely stressy, anxious person, and to have to go home, I would have freaked out. So they kept us there, did some tests and things, like they did like the MRSA swabs and things, and then eventually they moved me to my own room at about 8 AM, I think. Yeah, I was really lucky I wasn't put on a ward, I was put in my own room, it was really nice. Yeah, so yeah, I went into my room at about 8 AM, and they told me at that point, you won't be coming out until you've had the baby. You will not be leaving this hospital until you have had a baby. So I was like, oh my God, me and Andrew were like, oh, this is really happening. I think part of us was scared, part of us was excited, part of us was relieved. We'd had so many reduced movements that I think we were both so on edge all the time that something bad was going to happen. So in a way, we were kind of grateful that baby was as ready to meet us as we were to meet baby. It kind of felt like it was all a bit meant to be, that we'd been so panicked and so sure that he needed to get out, and he clearly felt the same. So it was all very like, it all felt very strange and very meant to be. And Andrew rang his mum and told her what was going on, and his mum had, I kid you not, at the exact time Andrew had rang to tell her my waters had gone, we were in labour, we were in hospital, his mum had been sat down telling his dad how she'd had this really vivid dream that I'd gone into labour. It was all very, very, very strange. So yeah, that was all on the Tuesday morning that all happened. So that day was fairly uneventful, really. I was getting lots of cramps, and at one point they did seem to get into quite a pattern. They were kind of like every 4 or 5 minutes, lasting 30 seconds. So I think at that point I was getting mild contractions, but they were completely bearable, totally fine. Yeah, they were totally fine. I just felt uncomfortable more than anything because of my waters. this is probably really naive of me, but I thought your waters, do you know, like in films, and you're in the supermarket and your waters break and they crash everywhere, and that is what I thought would happen. I thought my waters would break and then they'd stop and it'd be all done. No one tells you that doesn't happen. Those waters keep on coming right up until you have that baby. I was not prepared for that. It is so uncomfortable, just feeling like constantly like soggy. That sounds so awful, but it's not very comfortable. So me and Andrew like spent the day going for little walks around the hospital, going up and down the stairs, as I know that's meant to get things going. Weeks and your waters go and you aren't in established labour within 24 hours, they will induce you because it's not safe for the baby to be without waters for that long. But if you're preterm, they will actually try and keep the baby in until 37 weeks. So for me that wasn't too bad. It was the Tuesday when my waters went, and it meant I would have had to wait until the Friday to be induced. I would have had to stay in hospital that time, but I would have had regular 6-hourly monitoring to check the baby was okay. And I think the plan was also that they were going to give me antibiotics to prevent me getting an infection and to prevent baby getting an infection. So it wasn't too bad. But obviously we wanted to get things going faster than that. The thought of waiting till Friday to be induced seemed like a very, very long way off. So we were kind of walking around the hospital. We went and took some last bump shots because obviously I hadn't known. I thought I had like 4 or 5 weeks left with my bump, and I didn't. And when my waters had gone, my bump felt so small. It felt like I was like 25 week, like a little 25 week bump. So yeah, we like just had a nice afternoon really, like wandering around the hospital, trying to get things going, like bouncing on the ball. And my mum came and joined us in the evening and like brought some food, and we watched Bake Off and we all bounced away on the ball, and it was just a really nice day actually. Like I have very, very fond memories of that Tuesday. It was scary, and being such an anxious person, I thought I would be completely like overwhelmed by the whole experience, but I felt really calm. I just felt like it was meant to happen. That's the only thing I can say, is I just kept feeling like this is meant to happen. We were ready for him to come and he is ready to come. And like, I just felt very at peace with the whole situation, which for me doesn't normally happen. But I felt really, really like calm and really happy and like, okay. It was surprising. The Tuesday was really good. Because I was only in like early labour at that point. I wasn't having regular contractions. They hadn't bothered to check if I was dilated. Andrew and my mum, well obviously my mum, but Andrew had to go home that night as well. I think they left at about 10 o'clock. And about an hour after they left, my contractions really amped up. They were bearable throughout the night, just about. I didn't sleep at all, but they were bearable, but they were getting really painful. And by the time it was about 5 a.m, 6 a.m. on Wednesday the 27th of September, I was starting to struggle to manage them. I had some paracetamol, whatever you want to call it, and it didn't touch it at all. And I was starting to struggle. I felt really pathetic, to be honest, because I never knew, like, you don't know how you're going to handle labour, do you? You don't know if you're going to be like, think it's a walk in the park. Does anyone think it's a walk in the park? But I didn't know if I'd handle it well. I didn't know what my pain threshold was like. I've got PCOS, so I've always had really quite painful periods. So I thought, will that help me? I don't know. Don't think it helped me at all. I didn't cope very well. Like, I wasn't a nightmare, but I was in a lot of pain. And at about between 6 and 7 a.m. I went for a bath because Andrew wasn't due till 8 o'clock and I was really struggling. So the midwife suggested going for a bath to try and ease the pain. I went for the bath and it was horrendous. Whoever said water eases the pain, I'm not sure I believe them, because mine seemed to get worse when I got in the bath. Like, I just lay in the bath with my eyes shut like this for like an hour maybe. It wasn't too hot, but I don't know what came over me, but I was just like sweating and I felt like I could pass out, and the contractions seemed to, I don't know if it sped things along, but the contractions were getting a lot more intense. I was in a lot of pain. I wanted to get out of the bath, but I didn't know how I was going to get out of the bath. Like, I was just so, like, I just felt stuck there. I didn't know how to get out of the bath. It was a nightmare. It got to 8 o'clock and I knew that Andrew should either have just arrived or would be arriving soon. So I was like, right, it's 8 o'clock, I'm getting out of the bath. Like, stumbled back to my room, pretty much collapsed on the bed, and like Andrew had just arrived and he was like, he had no idea what was going on, because I'd been so like feeling so rubbish that I hadn't even really been like texting or replying to any messages. Like, I was just felt awful. So I like stumbled very dramatically back into the room and like collapsed on the bed. I think I probably like did the whole like, oh, and Andrew was like, oh, what's going on? And I felt really sick from the contractions, and I'm not a sicky person at all. I didn't have morning sickness. I am very, very rarely sick. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've been sick in my adult life. I am never sick, really. And I just started vomiting everywhere. It wasn't pretty. It was all over my top, all over the bed. Yeah, it wasn't very pretty, and I think Andrew did not know what he had walked into when he came back to hospital that morning. I don't think anyone had expected things to progress as fast as they had. I think it was kind of assumed that I would wait until the Friday and then be induced, but baby had other ideas, I think. So the midwives had been in and out at this point, and I wasn't very talkative. I basically sat on a chair the whole time with my eyes closed like this, and then every time I got a contraction I'd throw my arm out and grab Andrew and be like, it's happening again, and then be like this for like a minute and then just be like, and shut my eyes again until the next one. And like, I think the midwives were like, okay, things are like happening maybe. But weirdly, the monitoring machine wasn't picking up loads. And this is definitely a recurrent theme throughout my whole labour, that the machines just weren't really picking up my contractions. The midwives didn't really know what was happening with my contractions, but they weren't really being picked up, and they were, even though they were very intense, they were quite irregular, and they were irregular up till the moment I gave birth. I'm skipping ahead here, but essentially the midwives thought, right, I think we need to move you to the delivery suite and start things really happening, because I was struggling, and they thought, you know, let's just get this going. So that was about 10 a.m. I think they started to mute that idea, and at about 12, half 12, they moved us on to the delivery suite. We met our midwife for the labour, who was lovely. She was so nice, and weirdly, it turns out she lives like 2 streets away from me maybe, and she was so nice. Couldn't have asked for a nicer midwife. She didn't actually get to see me give birth because I gave birth about 2 hours after she went off shift, but she was with me for most of my labour and she was so lovely, and she made the whole experience like very positive, and I just really liked her, and she was happy for me to do whatever I wanted to do. So she was a total babe. So yeah, we went into the delivery suite and we started to discuss pain relief. I never got to film a birth plan. I'm going to be going off on so many tangents, but I never got to film a birth plan video, and it was something I really wanted to do, but obviously I went into labour early and I hadn't anticipated it, so I didn't get around to doing that. But I've always been of thinking you can't really make a structured birth plan. Baby will do what baby wants to do, but medication wise I've always been quite clear that I wanted either just paracetamol or an epidural. I didn't want anything that was going to make me feel sick. I didn't want anything that was going to make me feel spaced out. I didn't want anything that was going to make me lose my head or feel unclear or not myself. Nothing that was going to make me feel spaced out, sleepy, nothing that was going to make baby feel sleepy. That's the only kind of real thing I've had in my head. That and the fact I didn't want a forceps delivery, but we'll get onto that. So by this point, the paracetamol was not doing anything. She suggested gas and air, but I have a real thing about being sick. I'd already been sick a lot that day. I hadn't eaten anything, and it just wasn't for me. And I had the epidural. I know some people think that is a cop-out. Think what you want. It was bloody brilliant. What a genius invention is the epidural. I am not embarrassed that I had it. I felt the contractions. By this point I should say I was 3 centimetres dilated when I had the epidural, so I'd got that far on my own. I'd felt the contractions. I knew that they weren't for me. I can't understand why anyone would have a natural labour now, because that epidural is literally genius. No, I do. I totally understand why someone wouldn't have an epidural. I'm just being silly. But for me, it was definitely the best option. I was in a complete and utter state. I didn't want to see my mum because I didn't want her to see me like that. So until I'd had the epidural, I didn't want her to see me, and you know how important it was for me to have my mum there at that labour. That was the most important thing to me, and I did not want my mum to see me in that kind of state. I just thought it would be upsetting for her, it would be upsetting for me. I didn't want Andrew to see me that way, but yeah, you know, he'll deal with it. But I just didn't want my mum to have to see me like that, because I think it would have been quite traumatic for her. So yeah, I said I wanted the epidural. She was totally fine with that. She went and got that sorted, and really quickly I had the epidural. I had no problems with it. I didn't feel it. It wasn't painful. Anyone who is worried, I didn't look at the needle. I didn't see what it looked like, but it felt absolutely fine. It wasn't painful. And within about 10 minutes I could pretty much feel nothing. I could still feel the pressure of the contractions, so I knew they were happening, but I felt great. I whipped out my makeup bag, I was doing my makeup. I still looked horrendous because my hair was all wet and greasy from the bath, but you know, you gotta try and...
Very slow.
So yeah, the epidural for me was absolutely the right decision. I appreciate it isn't for everyone, but I hope that people can respect that for me it was the right decision, and I'm completely glad I had it, and I would have it over and over again. Because contractions and labour is painful, my god. No, the epidural for me was the right decision. So I had the epidural at about 1 o'clock. I was 3 centimetres dilated, and they put me on the hormone drip to try and bring my contractions more regular. I was having lots of contractions, but they were all over the place. They were in no pattern. It was all very strange. So yeah, they put me on the hormone drip straight after they gave me the epidural. Again, I was on the epidural, so I couldn't feel it. It didn't matter. It was great. I felt fabulous. And we rang my mum, and my mum came down. And we just had a really nice time for about 4 hours. We were all just chatting away. I was doing my makeup, we played games, we spoke to the midwife. Like, it was a really nice few hours. It was quite relaxed. Everyone felt happy. And yeah, part of labour was fabulous. I should also point out that as soon as I got to the delivery suite, I was on constant monitoring because I was preterm. They constantly monitored baby and constantly monitored contractions, which I was really, really happy about. I know some people wouldn't like that and like to be able to move around and have a more active labour, but for me, I was happy for baby to be monitored 24/7. It put my mind at ease. I knew they could pick up on any problems straight away. So for me, that was the best scenario, and that is what happened, and I'm very, very thankful for that, because there were quite a few times where both my heartbeat and baby's heartbeat were having some issues. Mine was extremely high the whole labour, and for a good few days after the labour my heart rate was through the roof, and baby's, I can call him by his name now, Wilf's, was kind of jumping around all over the place. When I had a contraction, his heart rate would really dip. And then it would come up and go really fast, and I think he was just ready to get out. I was ready to get him out, and yeah, about 4 hours after going on the epidural and the hormone drip, she checked to see how dilated I was. She, in her own words, my contractions were rubbish. Not rubbish in intensity, because they were painful, let me tell you, but rubbish in the sense that they were completely irregular. They had no idea what they were doing. Even with the hormone drip, they were just all over the place. And she was like, I'm going to check you again now, but I'm not expecting anything. I was 10 centimetres. I was fully dilated within 4 hours. God knows how that happened. I have no idea. She was so shocked. We were all shocked. And I think it was at that point, reality of what was about to happen set in. And I was I'm getting emotional already. I was like uncontrollably shaking. Why am I getting emotional? Wow, wasn't expecting this. I felt switched off today. I was like uncontrollably shaking, and I could not stop crying. Like, it was just all, I'd been totally fine. I felt so relaxed about everything, and it just all suddenly hit me that I was actually finally going to have this baby that I'd waited such a long time to have. Ooh. Sorry. Compose. I just hadn't expected to be fully dilated. I hadn't expected for it all to happen so fast. I hadn't expected to be in labour at all at that point. I think it was just all a bit of a shock, and I just went into shock, I think, and I was like shaking and crying, and it was all very scary. So also around this time, just after she had announced I was fully dilated and we would wait an hour to start pushing, that midwife shift actually ended and a new midwife came on. She was really nice too. Everyone I met in that hospital was nice. I've got nothing bad to say about anyone. But what she did say was, oh, I've got a medical student with me today. Do you mind if they sit in and watch your labour? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, you know, everyone's got to learn, that's totally fine. In walks the medical student. She'd left this part out, hadn't she? And he must have been about 25, 26, Irish, God. Sorry, Andrew, but this guy was a 10 out of 10, and all I could think was, I'm going to poo myself. I'm going to poo myself in front of this Irish fit doctor. I was like, what am I going to do? He's going to see me poo. I had this really irrational fear that I was going to poo in labour, and that this very attractive medical student doctor guy was going to see me. I think that kept me distracted from the actual fear of the fact I was about to push a baby out, because I was just so mortified that this Irish doctor might see me poo myself. It got to about 9 o'clock and it was time to start pushing, and one thing I will say about the epidural was that it did make it harder to, I could feel pressure, but I think maybe you don't get the same urge to push you get with like a natural labour without an epidural. So that's one thing I would say that's probably a negative for the epidural. For me, that's the only negative. That's the only thing I can think of. I had absolutely no problems with it. I've had no problems with it since. My back's felt fine. It wore off in exactly the amount of time they said it would. I've had no problems with it whatsoever. But that is probably the only negative I would say, is that it was quite difficult. I had to have my legs up in stirrups because I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't hold my own legs up because I couldn't feel them. And it did make pushing a lot harder. That being said, they said I pushed really well, and after an hour, they like you to deliver within an hour of pushing. He was super, super low. They could see his head before I even started pushing, but he just would not come out. And in the end, it ended up with about 10 doctors in the room, and after lots of feeling around, which I'm very grateful for that I couldn't feel myself, it was realised that baby Wilf wasn't facing the right way. So he was essentially a bit stuck where he was. He was kind of sideways rather than facing the way they like them to face. So he was kind of stuck and couldn't get out. Forceps had already been mentioned prior to that, but because he was also facing the wrong way, they decided they needed to whisk us into theatre, manually try and turn him. If they could manually turn him, they would get him out with forceps, which is always the one thing I'd said to myself, I don't want a forceps delivery. You hear some real horror stories, and that was the one thing I would have put in my birth plan that I really was not wanting. But it gets to the time, doesn't it? And you're just so desperate to get them out, and if they're telling you that's the best option, then that is what you do, and that is what we did. I also had to sign, I had to sign a form for going to theatre for the forceps delivery and for the manual turn, but I also had to sign a form for an emergency C-section, because if the turn hadn't worked, I would have had a C-section instead. So I signed both those forms for them. At that point, I didn't care how he got here. I wouldn't have cared anyway. I think I always would have been this way, very relaxed about how he gets here, but obviously knowing Lauren and knowing Teddy and what they went through in labour, it puts things in a very different perspective, and I just knew we needed to get him out, and I didn't care how it happened. Like, I'm very aware that things can go wrong in labour. It does happen. I think if you've not known someone that that's happened to, maybe you can distance yourself from it and convince yourself it won't happen, but I'm very aware that it can happen. So for me, it kind of just, I didn't care how they got him out, just wanted them to get him out. So yeah, signed these forms. It was hard because I wanted my mum to be there so much, but only one person was allowed in theatre with me, and obviously that had to be Andrew, he's Wilf's dad. But it was hard that my mum couldn't be there. I was so desperate for her to be there, and like, I can't imagine now, I'm getting emotional again, I can't imagine now how hard that must have been for her to just have to sit and watch me get whisked away so quickly, because it all went into a bit like crazy panic, and she seemed fine, but I don't know if that was just for my benefit and she was just trying to stay calm for me. I think that must have been really scary, because baby's heartbeat was all over the place, my heartbeat was all over the place. They'd put a little clip on Wilf's head, I can't remember what it's called, but one of the little clips that goes straight into the top of his head so that they could measure his heartbeat properly, because that was all over the place, and because he was so low they couldn't get a good reading of it on the normal, whatever they call the band thing, the ECG. They couldn't get a normal reading on that, so they had the clip in, and I think they just knew they needed to get him out. So it was all very fast, all very, very fast. Rushed to theatre. There was loads of people in the room. Andrew seemed so calm. He seemed so calm. It was like he was just going to sit in the cinema. I just remember thinking, like, how are you so calm? And like, he tells me now that he's completely traumatised and he felt like absolutely petrified and he wasn't calm in the slightest. But to me, he just seemed so calm that it made me feel calm. So he like handled it all brilliantly, because it really, I was freaking out, I'm not gonna lie. There were tears, like, not surprising from me. Clearly I'm a bit of an emotional wreck at the moment, but that he was so calm that it did stop me getting too panicked, I think. So yeah, we went into theatre. They ended up doing, I think, what they call a full spinal. So whereas the epidural was kind of, you know, from a certain thing down, that it numbed everything, this numbed everything much higher. So if I needed a cesarean as well, that was all numb. I couldn't feel anything. It was very, very strange. I remember at one point my legs were like up in the stirrup things, and I was just sat there and I suddenly like went into complete shock because I couldn't feel my legs, and I was like, where are my legs? And Andrew was like, your legs are there, it's fine. This is so rambly. I hope I can edit this into something that makes some sense. So yeah, everyone introduced themselves. It's really weird. They all go around the room and they're like, hi, I'm Dr. blah blah blah, I'll be doing this today. And like, I remember Andrew was saying afterwards, he was like, why are they all introducing themselves? Just get on with it. But yeah, so they did that, and then they started, and it's all a bit of a blur. I can't really remember. Andrew says it feels like that was the longest time of his life, and he just said he could just see blood and like stuff everywhere, and he said it was absolutely horrendous. But for me, it all felt quite fast. I don't remember much from being on the table thing to all of a sudden they pulled him out and there he was, and it was just the most crazy thing. And then he like started to cry. Oh god, he started to cry, and I think at that point we were both just so like relieved he was here and he was alive, and he was pink and he was crying and he was screaming, and he was just here. And me and Andrew were both complete messes, crying our eyes out. And they whisked him away and went to like weigh him and do all of that. And then this was the weirdest thing. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet in this video. Obviously, Wilf's middle name is Theodore, after Teddy, our godson. And Teddy and Wilf have had this weird connection. Teddy passed away in March, I should point out. And Teddy and Wilf have always had this really weird connection. There's been loads of things that have happened throughout pregnancy, and me and Lauren have always said like he's Wilf's guardian angel, and lots of weird things have happened. God. Loads of weird things have happened throughout this pregnancy that have let us know that like Teddy's looking out for Wilf. Oh God, stop it. And the midwife, obviously we hadn't expected to be whisked off to theatre, so we didn't have any of Wilf's clothes with us. So the midwife whisked him off and weighed him and put him in some clothes and brought him over to Andrew so Andrew could have a cuddle. And she'd put him in this hat, and the hat said Teddy on it. And it was just like the weirdest sign. I don't think we were meant to steal the hat, but we stole the hat. And you know what? I don't care. Sorry hospital, but that was just too weird. Like, we knew Teddy had been watching out for Wilf anyway, but he literally came over in a hat that said Teddy, and then I burst into tears some more, and I was like, oh Andrew, it's a sign from Teddy. And I think the midwife thought I'd absolutely lost the plot. I think she had no idea what I was talking about, and she was like, oh no, it was just the only one that fit him. The grannies normally knit hats for the babies, but we didn't have one that fit his head, so this is the only one that fit. And I was like, no, it's a sign from Teddy. She probably thought it was absolutely mental. But yeah, it was a sign from Teddy. I know it was. What was a bit tough was that they needed to take Wilf straight down to neonatal as soon as he was born. They didn't have anywhere we could stay together. The plan had been to put him on transitional care so we could be there together, but they didn't have any beds on transitional care, so they had to take him down to neonatal, which meant that we wouldn't be spending that first night together, which was tough. But I think I was just so shocked and relieved that he'd actually made it there alive. I know that sounds awful, but I'd just been so scared the whole pregnancy something awful was going to happen, that I was so relieved that he was okay and that he was going to be getting the care he needed on neonatal, that I didn't really, obviously I cared that I wasn't with him, but it didn't upset me. Like, I was just so happy he was there. So they whisked him straight down to neonatal while I was still up in theatre with Andrew, and they gave me the injection to get my placenta out, and it didn't work. I don't know what happened. It's meant to come out within 10 minutes of having the injection, but it didn't come out for me. So thank God I was numb. Thank God I was numb, because she had to put on this big glove. The doctor had to put on this big glove that came up to like here, and literally had to put her hand up there and scrape out my placenta with her hand, which is rather unpleasant. And they had to be super careful as well. As we know, I had the extra placental lobe, so they had to be really, really careful that they'd got that out. They got that bit out completely fine, but they said my main placenta was not looking great. So they couldn't be 100% sure if they'd got it all out, so I've had to be really vigilant when looking for bleeding and stuff after labour. Touch wood, it's all been fine, but at the time they weren't 100% sure, and they had to give me like blood clotting injections and things to check that that was all going to be fine. So yeah, that really was labour. I had to have an episiotomy during it because of the forceps. Obviously I was numb, so I didn't really feel the forceps, but I know it can make recovery more difficult. I have found recovery okay on the whole. The stitches for the episiotomy have definitely been the most painful part, as it kind of feels like they're in your bum, which isn't a nice feeling. But yeah, on the whole it's been okay. So that really is the kind of main labour and delivery story. Wilf was born at 11 p.m. on the 27th of September at 36 weeks 5 days, weighing £6 12 ounces. So I had to stay in the delivery room for like 2 hours just to check how I was doing, and the midwife had to like do all the recovery stuff she has to do. So my mum and Andrew went down to neonatal together to see Wilf, and they got to have cuddles with Wilf, which was really special. And I'll insert the first picture of my mum holding Wilf, which is like my favourite picture in the world. And yeah, they got to meet him. I hadn't had a cuddle at that point, but that was fine. I was just so happy he was okay, and that my mum was getting to meet him, and that Andrew was getting to check he was okay, and he took me loads of pictures and stuff, so that was fine. And I did get a quick cuddle with him that night. They wheeled me there on the way to postnatal so I could have a little cuddle with him, and yeah, I just couldn't believe how small he was, and I just couldn't believe he was our baby. And yeah, still a bit in shock now that he's actually here, but it's amazing. So yeah, on postnatal they gave me my own room, and Andrew was allowed to stay, which I'm so grateful for. They gave me my own room because obviously I didn't have Wilf with me, so they didn't want to put me on a ward full of women and their babies when Wilf wasn't with me. I should point out he was down on neonatal because he was having an antibiotic drip, because he had still been inside my tummy for 24 hours after my waters had broken. So the risk of infection was much higher, so he needed antibiotics, so that's why he was down there. We could go and see him any time, so it was totally fine. We like were up and down visiting him all the time, checking he was okay, and then the next afternoon, so on the Thursday, they brought him back up to us and we got to have some proper time with him, some skin to skin, and that was just lovely. Sadly, after that, things did take a little bit of a turn, as Wilf actually developed jaundice. It's really, really common in early babies, so it wasn't anything to worry about too much, and it's also really common in babies who've had a forceps delivery because of the bruising. So it was kind of a double whammy. He kind of was inevitably going to get jaundice, which was a bit rubbish, and it did mean he then had to go back down onto neonatal. He was under the phototherapy lights, so we didn't get to pick him up much, we didn't get to cuddle him much. Those first few days were quite difficult. Again, I was so grateful he was here that I didn't let myself get too upset about it or too down about it. I was just so relieved he'd made it and he was here, that I was just completely thankful, and like him being in neonatal was fine, and you know, I was happy for him to be there if that's where he needed to be. But yeah, it was quite a long process because he was kind of off and on the lights quite a while. We finally got sent home on Sunday the 1st of October, which again was really weird because that was actually Teddy's 2nd birthday. So again, it was like another weird sign from Teddy that we were sent home on his birthday and we got to go home. Sadly, that was quite short-lived, and the very next day we had to return to hospital and spend even more time in there because his jaundice levels just shot back up, which apparently is quite rare for levels to rise again, but yeah, I think I'm going to do a whole separate video on jaundice. Let me know if you would be interested in it. I'm by no means an expert, but we did spend quite a lot of time at the hospital. His levels were very, very high at one point, and kind of dropped and increased quite a bit as well. So yeah, let me know if you'd be interested in seeing a video on that. I don't know if it would be really boring, or I don't know if it would help people who are in similar positions. I don't know, let me know what you think, but I think I might leave it there, or this is going to be the longest video in the world. So yeah, I hope I've got plenty of clips I can insert along the way to make this nice and interesting for you. But yeah, I think I will leave it there. If you have any questions, please do let me know. I'm sure there's things I've missed out, so if there's anything you're wondering, do ask and I will reply in the comments. Yeah, and I will leave it there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye guys!